Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section, something coming out of the cave, and it's moving with a speed and agility that catches you up.
Vanished. Not retreated. Not scattered. Vanished. And when the men sent to find them walked into a particular cave carved into a remote hillside outside Kandahar, they came face to face with something that rewrote everything they thought they understood about the natural world. What they discovered inside that cave did not appear in any after-action report. It was not mentioned in any military press briefing. The names involved were scrubbed. The records disappeared. And the soldiers who lived through it were told, in no uncertain terms, that what they had seen did not exist. Deep within the fractured spine of the Hindu Kush Mountains, where jagged cliffs swallow daylight and silence carries a weight that no soldier can easily explain, something happened in the spring of 2002 that the United States military has never officially acknowledged. Patrol. This is the story of the Kandahar giant. And after more than 2 decades of silence, buried testimony, and institutional erasure, the pieces of this terrifying puzzle are finally starting to come together. It was a standard patrol deployment during Operation Enduring Freedom. A U.S. Army infantry unit was assigned to monitor a known insurgent supply corridor cutting through the mountains outside Kandahar. The route had been active for months, used by enemy forces to move weapons, explosives, and personnel under the cover of the rugged terrain. The squad assigned to monitor it was experienced, disciplined, and well-equipped. They checked in regularly by radio. Their early reports were routine. Nothing unusual, no contact, no signs of activity. And then, without warning or explanation, the communication stopped entirely. One transmission simply never came. And then another. And another. Until the silence became its own kind of alarm. Command waited. Hours passed. The silence deepened. Air reconnaissance was scrambled to sweep the last known coordinates, scanning for movement, smoke, distress signals. Anything that might tell them where these men had gone. The aerial units found nothing. No bodies on the hillside. No sign of a firefight. No evidence of an ambush. No flares. No radio pings. Nothing at all. The men had been there, in one of the most closely monitored conflict zones in the world, and then they simply were not. In military terms, that is one of the most alarming things that can happen. A squad does not vanish in a war zone without leaving some kind of trace, unless something entirely outside the normal rules of engagement was responsible. The decision was made to deploy a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit to investigate. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were among the most trained, most experienced, and most psychologically resilient fighters in the American military. They had operated in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. They were sent expecting to find the aftermath of an ambush. Bodies, shell casings, blood trails, enemy sign. What they found instead was something that none of their training had ever prepared them for. Scattered across the rocky terrain near the patrol's last known position were fragments of military equipment, not dropped or abandoned but destroyed. Tactical vests had been torn apart with enormous force. Weapons had been snapped and bent in ways that conventional combat does not produce. Communications gear was crushed beyond any possibility of repair. The destruction was thorough, savage, and deeply strange. But there were no bodies. No blood. No shell casings suggesting a firefight had taken place. The absence of those things was almost more disturbing than finding them would have been. Something violent had clearly occurred in this place. The ground told that story in its own language. Deep drag trails cut through the dirt and loose stone, wide furrows that suggested heavy objects had been pulled, not carried. Multiple sets of drag marks converged toward a single direction, leading away from the scattered equipment and into the rocky hillside beyond. The operators followed those marks with weapons raised and senses on fire. The marks led them to a cave. The entrance was unremarkable at first. Just another dark opening in the mountain face, the kind that dotted this entire region and had served as shelter, storage, and ambush point for centuries of conflict. But as the team advanced inside with their lights cutting through the darkness, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The air was wrong. Dense and stale, carrying a smell that several soldiers would later describe independently as a combination of rotting copper and dried blood. Not the smell of a recent firefight, but something older, something that had been accumulating in that space for a long time. The cave walls were close. The ceiling pressed down. And scattered across the floor in increasing density as they moved deeper were fragments of military gear. The same gear that had belonged to the missing patrol. Then came the bones. Human remains scattered without order or arrangement across the cave floor. Not buried, not placed with any intention, but discarded. Long bones cracked at unnatural angles. Skulls fractured with force that had nothing to do with bullets or explosives. Ribs snapped and separated from spines in a way that suggested not an explosion but a deliberate, physical dismemberment. The forensic picture being assembled in real time by these soldiers was deeply troubling. Whatever had happened to the missing patrol had happened here, in this cave. And it had been brutal beyond the scale of any known human or animal aggressor operating in that region. The team had just begun to process what they were seeing when the thing appeared. It came from deeper inside the cave, emerging from the darkness with a speed and silence that defied its size. And the size was the first thing that registered. An overwhelming, almost impossible scale. The creature stood upright, bipedal, broadly human in its general body structure. But it was between 13 and 15 feet tall. Its limbs were long and proportionate to its frame, not malformed or awkward, but symmetrical in a way that suggested not a biological accident but a design. Its skin was leathery and darkened, stretched tightly over dense, sinewy muscle. It wore crude coverings fashioned from animal hides, or what some soldiers later suggested might have been human skin, draped and layered like primitive armor. Thick, matted red hair fell from its head in tangled masses down to its lower back, coated and dirty, wild in a way that made the creature look as though it had existed in that cave for a very long time. Its face was deeply unsettling in its near-humanity. Eyes set back in a heavy brow ridge, wide open, reflecting the light in a way that suggested awareness and intelligence rather than animal reflex. A jaw lined with teeth that were triangular and jagged, not the dentition of a primate, but something optimized for tearing. And its hands. Every soldier who spoke about this would mention the hands. 6 fingers on each. 6 toes on each foot. An anatomical anomaly that appears in no known surviving large primate, but which appears repeatedly in ancient texts and regional folklore as a marker of something other. In that moment, facing those hands, more than one soldier reported a psychological vertigo, the recognition that what stood before them did not belong in the natural world as they understood it. The creature did not hesitate. It moved with immediate and deadly purpose, covering ground with terrifying speed for something of its mass. One soldier, referred to in later accounts only as Dan, was struck before the team could fully respond, impaled by a crude spear-like weapon the creature carried, a length of sharpened material as massive and lethal as anything a being of that size could make. The attack sent the unit into immediate combat response, and the cave erupted with gunfire. M4 carbines fired in controlled bursts. Sidearms discharged. The noise was enormous in the enclosed space, and the creature absorbed it. Rounds struck and seemed to do almost nothing, stumbling the creature perhaps but not stopping it. Its skin and mass appeared to distribute the impact of standard caliber rounds in a way that prevented the kind of tissue damage that would incapacitate a normal target. Kept coming. What finally broke the creature's advance was a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. The designated marksman in the unit dropped to the cave floor and delivered a concentrated burst of heavy fire directly into the creature's body mass. The difference was immediate and catastrophic. The giant faltered. Its momentum collapsed, and it came down with a force that shook the cave around it. Debris falling from the ceiling, the thud of impact felt physically through the stone floor. The firefight lasted approximately 30 seconds. It felt to everyone involved like much longer. In the silence that followed, the soldiers stood in the dark with their lights pointed at something that should not exist, something that had just killed one of their own and absorbed military weapons fire before finally being brought down by the heaviest portable firepower they carried. The body lay still. Over 1,100 pounds of creature, symmetrical and undeniably real, cooling on the floor of a cave in the mountains outside Kandahar. The team documented what they could and called for extraction. What arrived was not a standard medevac. It was a SH-47 Chinook, a heavy cargo and transport helicopter, which was already an unusual choice for recovering a wounded soldier. The personnel who stepped off that aircraft were equally unusual. They wore no unit patches, no identifying insignia of any kind. They did not speak to the Special Forces team beyond what was operationally necessary. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had done something like this before, securing the creature's massive body in a netted transport platform suspended beneath the aircraft. Then they lifted off, taking the body with them, and disappeared into the sky without explanation. Back at base, the isolation and pressure began immediately. Each member of the recovery team was separated from the others and interrogated individually. Non-disclosure agreements were produced, documents that went well beyond the standard confidentiality requirements for classified operations. These agreements prohibited not just disclosure of the mission's details but any acknowledgement that the mission had occurred at all. The consequences of refusal were made explicit: career destruction, forced reassignment, discharge, dishonor. Some soldiers refused to sign. They were transferred to remote postings, quietly sidelined, effectively removed from any position where their testimony might carry institutional weight. The soldier named Dan, killed inside the cave, appeared in no casualty database for that period or that region. No record, no name match, as though he had never existed. In the years that followed, the story began to leak anyway. Not through official channels but through the quiet, anonymous networks of veterans and researchers who understood that the absence of a record is itself a kind of record. Online forums, independent investigators, and alternative media platforms became the vessels for testimony that had no official home. The descriptions that emerged from different people who had no verifiable contact with each other were remarkably consistent. The cave, the bones, the creature's height and hair color, the 6 fingers, the Barrett rifle, the Chinook, the men without patches. Consistency across independent anonymous accounts does not constitute proof, but it constitutes something that is very difficult to explain away entirely. Freedom of Information Act requests into personnel recovery operations near Kandahar during that period produced fragmentary results. Partial documents referencing a recovery operation in the relevant area and time frame surfaced briefly, then vanished or were reclassified without explanation. Flight logs from Bagram Air Base showed a gap of approximately 24 hours during the precise window when the alleged extraction would have taken place, an extraordinary anomaly at one of the busiest operational hubs in the theater. These are not the fingerprints of a story that never happened. These are the fingerprints of a story that someone worked very hard to make disappear. The cultural context adds another dimension that is impossible to ignore. The people of Afghanistan, particularly in the mountain regions, have carried stories of massive cave-dwelling entities for generations. Beings described as violent, territorial, sometimes red-haired, deeply hostile to human intrusion into their domain. These stories predate the American presence in the country by centuries. Local guides warned U.S. soldiers away from certain caves during the early years of the war, citing dangers that were never fully translated or taken seriously. When those warnings are set against what the recovery team reported finding in that cave, the folklore begins to feel less like superstition and more like accumulated empirical knowledge passed down through time. The psychological explanations offered by skeptics, combat stress, collective hallucination, the brain's tendency to construct narrative from chaos, are worth taking seriously, but they don't fully account for the physical evidence described. Torn equipment and shattered bones have mass and reality. The drag marks on the ground were documented before the cave was entered. The absence of official records where records should exist is a structural problem that psychology cannot explain. And the pattern of intimidation, silence, and career consequences directed at those who spoke about the incident suggests not that nothing happened, but that something happened that powerful people wanted very badly to remain unknown. What was found in that cave outside Kandahar in the spring of 2002 remains officially classified as nothing. A story that does not exist, an encounter that never took place, soldiers whose names have been erased from the databases that are supposed to account for every life lost in service. But the evidence that leaks around the edges of that official silence tells a different story. It tells of something ancient and enormous that had been living in the mountains long before any modern army arrived to fight over them. Something that killed trained soldiers and was brought down only by the heaviest weapons in the unit's arsenal. Something whose body was extracted by people with no names and no insignia, flown to a destination that has never been disclosed, and catalogued in a record that the public is apparently never meant to see. The mountains of Kandahar have kept their secrets for a very long time. The question is no longer whether something was found in that cave. The evidence, fragmentary and suppressed as it is, points clearly enough in that direction. The real question, the one that the official silence cannot answer and that every consistent account raises in the same urgent way, is what it means. What does it mean that something like this exists? What does it mean that the people who know the most about it are the ones least permitted to speak? And what else might be waiting, undiscovered and unacknowledged, in the dark places that no map marks and no official record acknowledges? The cave was found. The creature was real. And somewhere, in a facility that does not appear on any public document, the answer to this mystery already exists. Locked away from the rest of us perhaps forever.